Antoinette Glynn, the flower of life is new, refreshing and unique. Luxor's only mystery school offering ancient wisdom workshops, courses and sacred journeys. She does private consultations. Antoinette joined us in Dublin. This is her account and some of the information from her Egyptian and other Irish connections.
So yeah, I have a mystery school in Luxor at the Valley of the Kings, and surrounding that mystery school is the temples where Amenhotep III, Akhnaten, and Tutankhamun and Nefertiti. All those temples are literally surrounding my mystery school in Egypt, in Luxor. And my mystery school in Luxor managed to be placed directly in front of Toth Hill, which I actually didn't plan at all. So the mystery school is called the Flower of Light, and it's directly opposite the Valley of Kings in Luxor. So that's the point that I'm going to start with. Why, did I end up there? So I was born in Ireland. I'm Irish. And at 14, my father and my grandfather had spent time in Egypt before I was born. And my father had told me a lot about Egypt. He had showed me his own pictures. He had black and white pictures of the pyramids, things like that. So I did always have a fascination with Egypt. But at 14 years of age, I had a motorbike accident. And in that motorbike accident, it was ridiculous. I was 14. It was a summer evening, but it was very late at night. We were actually going away on holiday, and I was going out to say goodbye to my cousin. And I was on the back of the motorbike with no helmet. I had no jacket. I had nothing. I had just a really light top and a skirt on. So this is on the way back home. So it's about maybe 1 o'clock in the morning now. I was a bit wild at 14. Maybe 1 o'clock. And my parents didn't even know I was out.
Obviously, you're very responsible.
Now, not then. But at 14,
they did. Spoil a good story.
This is it. They didn't even know I was out. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, we had a crash. But the interesting thing was, I was on the back of the motorbike, and just before the crash happened, I heard a voice as loud as I hope you can hear me, that said, "You're going to die now. Close your eyes, because you don't want to see what's going to kill you." So that's what I did. I closed my eyes. And when I opened them again, I wasn't in my body.
This is amazing, because we've just interviewed somebody who said virtually exactly the same.
Okay,
the same circumstances.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. So when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my body. I was in, all I can describe it as is a sphere, a blue sphere, And I was sitting inside, up in the air, and I watched everything. I saw the whole accident. I saw myself falling back off the motorbike. I saw myself tumbling down the road. I saw the whole thing. And then I came back into my body. I was in the middle of the road. And I remember thinking, how am I going to get off the road? Because it was a really windy, old country Irish road. And I thought two things at the same time. I thought, one, a truck is going to come along and hit me. Or two, nobody's ever going to find me. So there was two conflicting things at the same time. And I was only 14 years of age. But anyway, after that, I forget. And then when I came back around again, I was at the side of the road. I don't know how I got there, because I did actually try to get up off the road, and I couldn't. I found out eventually that I had a broken pelvis. I got 163 stitches on my leg. I had a dislocated shoulder. I had smashed all my left arm. I was actually a ballerina. I was qualified to teach ballet before this accident. Afterwards, I couldn't even walk. So I was left on the road, and when I came to for the second time, I was at the side of the road. But I don't know, I couldn't have got there because I couldn't get off the ground. I remember when I came to in the middle of the road, I couldn't get off the ground. So when I was at the side of the road, there was somebody beside me all the time. I don't know who they were, but it was a really, really tall person. They were wearing a long blue, what I know now as a galabaya, which is what the men wear in Egypt. I didn't know what it was then. I just called it a dress. It was a long. But anyway, I was taken out of body. I was taken, as I was sitting, as my physical body was on the side of the road. I was taken to, I don't know how to describe it. It was almost like an old inn that you would see around the time of Dick Turpin. And this person was with me the whole time, and the name of the inn was called the Rat and Raven. And I had to go into this inn to identify something. And I didn't want to do it. And this thing was just the most horrible thing you've ever seen. When I did eventually identify this thing, it was the most horrible thing. It was what you would imagine to be like the Grim Reaper. but black. Everything was really, really black. And what I had to do, I had to go into this inn, which was called the Rat and Raven, and I had to look at this thing right in the eyes. And I knew what was going to happen. I knew once I did this, I could never come back and tell anybody about it. I could never warn anybody. This was what was in my mind. So I had to go in. I looked at this thing in the eyes. But when I did, I was taken, pulled, literally pulled into the eye, into the pupil of the eye.
I'm familiar with that kind of experience.
When I came out the other side, I was in a temple, and it was in Egypt. But it was very much of a feeling that this temple was in the sky. You know, it was very celestial sense of it, about it. There was a man there. He was dressed all in purple, really, really deep purple. And on the walls, all around the walls, there was light that flickered, the same purple color. But there was no source for the light. There was no, I looked, there was no place where the light was actually coming from. It was just everywhere. And this man asked me questions. He said to me, "You must answer these 3 questions." And I said to him, without even thinking, I said, "I can't." And he smiled and he said to me, "No, you do. You do know the answer. You have to answer these questions." So I refused to answer because I said I can't answer. So he said, because of my refusal, I ended up somewhere else in another place. But this place was underground. But this was again in Egypt. It was underground, there was water, I now know where these places are now. But so in this underground space, there was another person, another man, like almost like a priest. He had white around, nothing on top. And I was in this really long room with pillars, and at the very top of the room, there was steps going up and there was an altar. And this man, this priest, I think he was behind it, and he had a baby. And he held it over his head like this. And he said to me, "You have to answer these 3 questions." And I said, "I can't." And he said to me, "If you don't answer the questions, I'm going to drop this baby." Now what I knew was that this altar that this guy stood behind had a stone on the top. But I knew that when you take the stone, everybody thought this was just an altar. It wasn't. When you take the stone away, this is the bottomless pit. This goes just down and down and down and down, because there's a big hole there and the stone covers it. So he said to me, "I'm going to throw the baby down if you don't answer these questions." I said, "No, I'm not answering. And so I knew he was going to throw the baby down, and he did. And it was at that point that I saw almost like a light, you know, this really bright light. And I was like, and then I heard a voice. And then I realized that I was actually at the side of the road. And some man had come along. This is back in the real world. I'm back in my body now. And what I saw, the lights that I saw, was the light of his car, you know. And this man had somehow managed to come along the road and see me sitting along the side of the road at about 2 o'clock in the morning on a dark, rainy road. I don't know how he saw me. But he came and picked me up and physically brought me to the hospital. And he saved my life, absolutely saved my life. And my father put an ad in the newspaper. He asked the attending doctors and nurses as the time went by, did the man ever come back to the hospital to ask after me? He never came back. He just brought me to the hospital that night and disappeared. So that was part of my start, I think, of my journey to realizing what it is that I had to do. So fast track to now. Basically, it's taken me all these years to work out what actually happened, what this was about. And all these years later, I realized it was about the connection between Egypt and Ireland, but it was also about the connection between what we call life and death. Because what I now realize I experienced was my own birth and my own death. And what I did was I pulled a thread. I pulled a thread of a memory from one life to another. That's continuity. And that's what the ancient science of alchemy, the science that Akhnaten was trying to reestablish. This is what it's about. It's about pulling, if you can pull a thread of memory from one lifetime to another and remember it and activate it as your mission and carry it out, then you have continuity of memory, which is everything that what the Egyptologists call the Book of the Dead, but it's actually called the Book of Coming Forth by Day or the Book of Coming Forth by Light. And this is alchemy. And alchemy is the transmutation of energy. and the continuation of memory from what we call death into life. So I was shown those two extremely profound things at the age of 14, and I didn't know anything. When I came back from that motorbike accident, I thought I was going insane. Because what I also saw when I came back, which I didn't see before, was this complete false, maybe I should say skewed energy grid. Skewed, it's out of kilter, you know. And I saw that so clearly. I didn't see it, I lived it, I felt it, it was everything. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know anything when I came back from the motorbike accident. I used to, and it's not about amnesia, it wasn't anything like that. It was, I could see how everything, I used to say when I eventually met my husband, I met him quite young, and I was still recovering from the injuries when I met him. And I used to tell him it was like somebody got the entire universe and moved it 1 degree out of where it should be. So I can't point anything out and say it's wrong, because everything is wrong. Everything is out of place. Everything is wrong. Everything is not the way it should be. But before I had the accident, this is something I used to say to my father all the time. I used to tell my dad all the time, this is not the way it used to be, because we didn't need to eat. We didn't need to speak to communicate. And I used to tell my dad that, you know, there's no such thing as death. We don't die. Why do people think that we die? I knew all this before the accident. But when I had the motorbike accident, I had a complete loss of memory for years and years and years. And I only realized afterwards that the actual visual of that baby going down into this black hole actually transpired in my life from the minute that accident happened to me. Because from that accident, about 4 years later, my best friend died, and I was actually sitting with her when she died. About, you know, a year later, I became pregnant and I lost my daughter. My aunt, who was really close to me, died. So from the point of that accident, I actually did go down this incredible black hole, you know. That's what I saw in the accident, you know. It's all clear now, but it wasn't then. And I saw that I was going to enter this black hole. And it was the densest, most horrible place, you know. It was prison. It was, everything was wrong, everything was, but it's, as I said, it's taken me so many years to realize what that actually was about. And one of the things that my dad and myself talked about for so long, we always talked about this, was, does consciousness exist after death? So why do I bring my dad into it? Because, as I told you earlier, my dad had been in Egypt before I was born, and so had my grandfather. And when my dad passed in 2003, he basically relayed the plan to me from the other side for what I needed to do, which was to go to Egypt. So the very first time I ever visited Egypt was in the year 2000. My dad passed in 2003. And in 2006, my dad said to me, he had already passed at this stage. He was communicating to me from beyond the veil, if you like. Because before he died, this is the experiment we agreed. You know, when my dad was in the hospice and when he was dying, he said to me, we've always been able to communicate telepathically. That won't stop when I die. So it didn't. And he continued to communicate with me. So what I realize now is that when my dad passed, obviously he understood the entire plan that had happened to me in that accident. He didn't understand it when he was in physical form, but he did when he passed. So he was able to guide me in the plan that I was to eventually, which was to build a mystery school. So in 2006, my dad told me, you have to leave Ireland. You have to get out of Ireland. And you have to be out of Ireland before 2007. You must go in 2006. So I left Ireland in 2006, went to Egypt, and created the mystery school that I have over there now. So I've spent, even at this time, when I went to Egypt to build a mystery school, I didn't realize, I really at that point didn't realize, I still didn't fully realize what I was doing. So where I actually got the mystery school, it took me so long, from the year 2000 to 2006 was when I went actually to live in 2006. But we had, myself and my husband and my son, and we had been traveling back and forward since the year 2000. So for 6 years, we had been going back and forward from Ireland to Egypt, back and forward. And in 2006, my dad said, you have to go now, you have to go to Egypt, you've got to live there, and you've got to create this mystery school. So I did. And my husband and my son trusted me enough, and trusted the guidance that my dad was giving me. And there's not many men, I don't think, that would do that, or sons for that matter. And they trusted me enough to leave everything. We sold a lot of what we had, and we just left. And we went to Egypt. We went to try and, how are we going to create this mystery school? So we got land, and after, it was my husband actually kept saying, we were on the land about 6 months, and he kept pointing at the mountain across the road and saying to everybody and anybody that would answer him, because there was something on the top of the mountain, and he kept saying, does anybody know what that is on top of the mountain? So about 6 months after we had been on the land, and a local tour guide was with us, and my husband again asked him, would you know what's on that mountain? And the tour guide said to my husband, you mean Toth Hill? And of course I was sitting beside him, and I said, what? And he said to me, Toth Hill. And I said, that's Toth Hill? And he said to me, yeah. So without even trying, without even realizing it, I had actually created the mystery school directly in front of Toth Hill. And Toth is the master of the mystery schools. So the two things, that I had always been fascinated with about Egypt was Toth, and a character called Akhnaten. Ironically, I'll just tell you this now, ironically, I only discovered this as well, as the centre was being built, because what I actually have over there is, I have guest chalets, 13 guest chalets, and a swimming pool. So people come in groups, they stay, I bring them out on journeys in through the temples, on ascension journeys is what they are. But anyway, I'm going forward. So it was when we were doing the building, and one day there was a problem, and the builders, there was no builders arriving. So I asked the project manager, I said, what's the problem? Why is nobody arriving, And he said, because we're having a problem getting the sand. And I laughed. I said, hello, the Sahara Desert is across the road. You're having a problem getting sand? And he said, no, it's a particular type of sand. We're in Egypt, and he's having a problem getting sand. But he said, no, it's a particular type of sand we need. And I said, really, what type of sand? And he said, well, we have to get it from a particular area. And I said, where do you have to get it from? And he said, from Malkata. Now, that wouldn't ring a bell with anybody, but Malkata is actually the palace of Akhnaten and of Amenhotep III, who was his father. So I was blown away by this, because in that moment I realized that my center, my mystery school, was built using the sand from Akhnaten's palace. Everything in my center, because it's all built from natural substances. The center I built it's eco-friendly. So my entire center was built with the sand from Akhnaten's palace. I was completely blown away, because the two things that I was so fascinated with, if you want to say, was this character Akhnaten and Toth, And I got the land, I got the mystery school in front of Toth Hill, and everything was made from the sand from Akhnaten's palace. So then I was to realize, as time went by, that Akhnaten, Tutankhamun, this is the lineage that I didn't even realize when I went to actually build the mystery school. These are the lineage of people who are connected with Ireland. So for example, it's Tutankhamun's sister, who is buried in Glen Scota, which is actually named after her. Scota it means little flower, but it's also a name that was given to her. Her name was Meritaten. This is, possibly it was Meritaten, but it is one of the lineage of Akhnaten. But there is, I think Lorraine Evans in Kingdom of the Ark said it was Scota, was Meriaten, one of the daughters of Akhnaten, who's buried in Kerry. So, who's the sister of Tutankhamun. At Tara, there was a body found also in 1976 by Sean O'Riordan, and this was named the Tara Prince, because they found jewellery on this body that it was found under the Mount of Hostages, and the jewellery that was found on the body had been analysed, and they realised that the process of the beads that were made, the jewellery that the body wore, was very, very similar almost to the funerary jewellery of Tutankhamun. But the process of making these beads, it's called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this properly, but it's faience or faience. And it's a process of mixing plants and mineral extracts into paste, and then you make beads, and you fire them and glaze them, and you make beads. But these plant and mineral this process is only done in Egypt. Plus, the mineral and plant extracts actually came from Egypt. So the necklace around this body that was found at Tara was absolutely Egyptian. So, you know, the necklace being Egyptian doesn't mean necessarily the body was, but this is the lineage of the people that came into Ireland. So then I found that what I had actually done, without even realizing it, was I created the mystery school right where all, literally around in a circle, where my mystery school is all the temples of Amenhotep III, who was the father of Akhnaten. Akhnaten, Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, and these are all the lineage of people. It's their family that came into Ireland. But more importantly, it's their lineage that left Ireland in the first place. So what I realized as time went by was this is exactly what I had done. I had retraced those exact steps. I had left Ireland to build a mystery school. I've spent 10 years in Ireland. Well, I've spent 16 years, but my mystery school is there 10 years. I've spent 10 years living there. I'm back in Ireland now because I'm trying to establish my mystery school here, which is going to connect with the one that I have in Egypt. So I have only realized as I've gone through this process that what I actually did was retrace those steps. So I physically retraced the steps of my ancestors who left Ireland all that long time ago. And when I say my ancestors, I mean the mound builders. I mean the people who built like Newgrange, Noath, Doath, all those beautiful places we have in Ireland, and all over the world, because their story is told in Egypt. So I literally retraced.
Just pause it there.
Yeah.
All over the world, and we'll. Okay. Where do you want to focus? You've gone back. You've retraced your steps, right? Mm-hmm. Where is that bringing you? What's the meaning that this has? You've had your death experience. Mm-hmm. You've met ancients. You've come through this to retracing your steps.
Yeah.
Where does this bring you to this point?
So at this point, most recently, I would say that I have really, integrated this, exodus, if you want to call it that, of people that had left Ireland.
I mean, the most important thing here we're dealing with is a deep connection between Ireland, or what we now call Ireland.
Yeah.
You mentioned Scotia, which is the ancient, original, one of the original names for so-called Ireland.
Scotia, yeah.
The ancient connection with the Irish, or those who survived the catastrophe from Atlantis.
Yeah.
And their connection with Egypt.
So you want me to talk about those people?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And those ancient knowledge, because there's bearings coming today that some catastrophe, whatever they had to survive from then, is coming to us now.
Okay.
So we need to know what that ancient language was. But it's also because that's why Ireland has been so oppressed, to keep that from being woken up within the Irish, our DNA, knowing that link with Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, okay, so the people, then, I mentioned earlier about Akhnaten, so the lineage, his lineage of people, going back in time from Akhnaten, would have been the people who left Ireland in the time that we may call Atlantis, and went to Egypt. Their story is told in a temple in Egypt, in Edfu temple. It's called the Edfu building texts. And on the walls, literally, it's inscribed on the walls of the temple. And it tells about the people that came into Egypt in a time when it's known as the first time, they call it in ancient Egypt, Zep-Tepi. It's known as the first time. And those people were called the Shemshu Hor, or the followers of Horus, or the Sheshu Hor. There's different names for them. And their story is told of their arrival into Egypt. And what they did was they first established the center, the exact center of the earth. So they were re-establishing that. It seems to show that the center of landmass may have shifted because they were re-establishing a center. So this is what the story tells in Edfu. It tells of these Shemshu Hor, and they're also called the mound builders. And they say they came in to Egypt from their previous homeland. And it says their previous homeland had been devastated by flood, by water. And it says they came into Egypt to recreate what they had in their previous homeland. It says they first started by establishing a mound at the very center of the earth. And upon that mound, there was a pyramid erected. That mound is the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid marks the exact center of the landmass of the earth. So the story in Edfu Temple tells of how this network or grid work was established. So the first mound was created at Giza, which marks the center point of the Earth's landmass. And from there, all the way down along the Nile, they created mounds whereby later on temples would be placed. So they were creating a grid work on the ground. And this grid work they were creating on the ground was a mirror of what was in the sky, but at a particular point in time.
Well, the mathematics of that grid work means they must have had an off-world perception to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they knew the 0 degree meridian line, which in times of, when the globe was being circumnavigated, that was one of the things that the people who were trying to navigate had a problem with, because they knew the equator, but they didn't know how to calculate the 0 degree meridian line. But thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, they had already calculated that. So they had to have known that the Earth was spherical. They had to have been able to measure and map the Earth. But the Great Pyramid is a scale model of the Earth itself on a scale of 1 to 43,200. And that 432 might be a familiar number because it's the harmonic frequency for all musical instruments, as they used to be before they were retuned to 440. So it's the natural frequency of the grid. You see, that's the problem. There's two grids, if you like. There's one that's, you might say, a synthetic one, and there's a natural harmonic one. Okay, and this is the problem. This is what I saw in the accident. There's a synthetic grid. It's not the one that we're meant to experience. It's a bit of a misnomer that we're meant to experience. But
these grids.
Okay, so this is a story that's told in Edfu Temple, is how it was being established, and it was being established by placing the pyramids and the temples upon the mounds that were originally created by the Shemshu Hor, and that's the story that's told. And their arrival into ancient Egypt is called the first time. And when they created these mounds was to re-establish this grid. So the grid work was the crystalline energy grid. It's a higher consciousness grid. That all the temples exist in 3 states. There's what people call the Hall of Records, and a lot of people think that only exists at Giza. There's a Hall of Records under every temple. So you have a Hall of Records below. You have the physical temple in the middle, if you like, and above you have the ethereal temple, so the energy temple. So these energy grids connect to all 3 levels. So I may be stepping ahead a bit, but anyway, the science of the people who left Ireland and went into Egypt, this is their science. Okay, so why Akhnaten?
But the Irish knew of the West, the North and the West, and
they brought this into Egypt with them. Yeah. But
so are you saying that those who came to Egypt came from what we now call Ireland?
Yes.
After this catastrophe?
Yes. There's a book written by a guy called Ulf Erlingsson, and it's called Atlantis from a Geographer's Perspective, Mapping the Fairyland. And he writes about how Ireland, England, the Scandinavian countries and Europe were all connected by land masses, which in fact, if you look on Google Earth now, you can still see those land masses under the water.
Yeah.
So they were all connected. Ireland, England and Europe was all one landmass. They weren't separate.
It was known as the grass, as Andrew Power says, the grasslands of Europe.
Exactly. And this flooding in this area, where it's told in the story I've just told you about Edfu Temple, and they tell about how these people came into Egypt because they had a flooding in their own land. Well, this would be the flooding that was talked, how England and Ireland were separated, and how they were separated from how all those land banks were submerged.
Recent, really.
It's relatively recent, yeah. I think most people say around 10,500 years ago, which puts it approximately half a precessional cycle away. The precessional cycle is important, and that's a 25,920 year cycle that our zodiac is symbol of, if you like. So this is one of the things that they were actually building in harmony with, was this cycle. So just let me speak about Akhnaten, because Akhnaten was of the lineage of the people that left Ireland, came into Egypt. So just approximately we'll say that these people went into Egypt about 30,000 years ago. I know that may be putting it back further than most people do. I'm saying 30,000 years because there's the records of Manetho, who says that the Shemshu-Hor arrived into Egypt in 36,000 BC. That's making it about 40,000 years ago. I know that's gone back way further than any, you know.
Well, the crucial thing is how they survived the catastrophe. What happened after that?
But you see, it says in the king lists in Egypt, in Manetho's records, it says that there were, there's rulers. Okay, first of all, they say the Shemshu-Hor came in, okay, and then the first human king. You know, so that implies that the Shemshu-Hor weren't.
But remember, Ireland. How did we get Oscotia in Ireland, and she's buried here?
She's buried in Ireland because the people who went into Egypt, the people who are written about in Edfu Temple, the mound builders who went in and established the mounds, they left Egypt then, years later, you know, thousands of years later. Let me put the time frame, according to Manetho, we'll say, at approximately 30,000 years ago. I'll say 30, okay? I'm just saying for this, we'll say those people arrived into Egypt from Ireland 30,000 years ago. So then bring it forward into the time of Akhnaten, okay, into his lineage. There's a lot of time between those people arriving and Akhnaten's time. Akhnaten would be approximately 3,000 years, 1,600 BC. So the knowledge, if you like, this pure knowledge had faded and been lost by the time Akhnaten had come into being pharaoh.
There's clear evidence that there was a previous time of high knowledge and
yes.
they have gone down.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. The pyramids and the temples are technology. They're highly advanced technology. They're the most advanced technology. I'll give you a quick example. The Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is a square circle. It's also an octahedron. The measurement, the standard unit of measurement in ancient Egypt was the cubit. Okay? Today, we're developing quantum computing. Okay? What's the unit of memory in a quantum computer? It's a qubit. Okay? The ancient unit of measurement in ancient Egypt was a qubit. I'm trying to give you a clue as to how advanced this technology is. Okay? Quantum computing works on the basis of a binary system as ordinary computing does. But in ordinary computing, the memory in an ordinary computer has to collapse into either being a 1 or a 0. Okay? In quantum computing, you can collapse this quantum realm and your unit of memory can be both at the same time. It can be a 1 and a 0 at the same time. That's very similar to, I don't know if you've heard of the experiment, the double slit experiment. It's where electrons were fired through double slits.
Yes.
Particles should behave in a certain way.
It's a perception thing.
But they didn't. They behaved as waves.
It's based on what you perceive.
Yes. So they're called, you're talking about the observer effect.
Yeah.
They're two different experiments.
Well, that's the consciousness.
So basically what the observer effect and the double slit experiment proved was that consciousness collapses the quantum realm. In other words, it's not there till you look for it. So what I'm trying to connect with the Great Pyramid, one of the geometrical and mathematical quandaries or puzzles, if you like, of one of the mystery school initiates would be to square the circle and circle the square. Well, the Great Pyramid in its construction squares the circle and circles the square. If you look at a circle and a square, okay, it's a circle and a line, a straight line. Binary code is 0 and 1. Do you see where I'm going with this? In a computer, 0 and 1. When you turn on your computer, you see live images walking around on your screen, okay? But if you could see the real language, it's only 0s and 1s, yeah? But to your eye, you see real people, movies on your screen. The Great Pyramid is a square circle. It's based on exactly the same, 0 and 1, okay? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
The Great Pyramid is based on the same thing, 0 and 1. Our computers now can only use either a 0 unit of memory or a 1 unit of memory. A quantum computer can use both at the same time. This is how advanced the Great Pyramid is. What I'm saying is the Great Pyramid is a quantum computer. That's what I'm saying.
And there's lots of those pyramids and they're all linked.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, Alaska.
All over the world, all over the world.
Romania,
and even what we consider mounds in Ireland are actually pyramids. What we call mounds in Ireland are really, there's a lot of pyramids in Ireland, but you know, we haven't kept them in their original shape. You know what I mean? They've been, I think, promoted to become more mound-like than pyramid-like. There's some that are very obvious
the
though.
tops were taken off some of the mountains.
You're right, mountains. There are mountains.
Flat topped.
Yeah, there are mountains in Ireland that are not mountains; they're pyramids. Yeah. So this lineage, you know, and I just really want to say as well, because Atlantis was a high consciousness. It's the name that we've, you know, from Plato, that we use to describe this high level of consciousness. But one thing I do want to say is that yes, the Irish were people who went into Egypt and established this, and all over the world. They went all over the world, not just into Egypt. But what I want to say is that this high level of consciousness existed all over the world. All over the world. It's not, you know, my opinion is, how can we say that this originated in Ireland, let's say?
Yeah, but we've had the consciousness here in Ireland shut down. I mean, there's an awful lot since the ancient Druids. I mean, forget recent history with King Willie. I mean, one of the connections about the William of Orange thing was it was not a battle, it was a ritual.
No.
It was a psychic, some kind of mind control issue, use modern parlance, but this goes back much further.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It goes right back in. It goes back to Akhnaten. This is where it goes back to, because this is when it happened. You know, and what you're saying.
Why was Atlantis destroyed?
Okay. There's a cyclical event that takes place throughout the 26,000-year-long cycle of precession. It's actually 25,920 years long. And there's a cyclical events that take place within that cycle. They're events that cyclically take place. We're saying cataclysms, you know, but they're cyclical things that take place according to the law of rhythm. There's 7 universal laws and principles according to the mystery schools and according to Thoth. And one of the universal principles is the law of rhythm. Everything has a rhythm. Everything rises and falls, an ebb and flow, an incline and a decline. And what we experience as reality is exactly that. It has to abide by those laws. I know that people are always talking about comets coming from outer space, planets crashing into each other. You know, my opinion, what I know is that what happens is cyclical. What happens to us on Earth...
Yeah, but the bottom line is something's coming now.
Yes, there is, yeah.
And our awareness has been shut down. We need to make our
What's coming now is an awakening.
Again.
What's coming now is...
solve this problem.
Absolutely. And what's coming now is an awakening. It's not a cataclysm. What's coming is an awakening. But if you want my opinion on all this cataclysm thing, if you can make people in fear, okay? If you can say every day of the week on the internet or whatever that there's this terrible thing going to happen, and there's this terrible thing going to happen, and there's this terrible thing going to happen, then even people who are starting to wake up are going to kind of go back in fear.
Exactly.
So there is a big thing happening, but it's an awakening. And all these things that are being brought in to shut this awakening down is all these fear things about, like, comets are coming, the 2012 thing, you know. I mean, how many people really around the world, there were quite a lot of people who killed themselves over thinking that the world was going to end in 2012. I mean, I personally know a girl who was considering killing herself because she thought the world was going to end in 2012. You know, and I know people who did. So, I mean, that's like, you know, it's such a fear mechanism. But I think...
How do we overcome this? How do we...
Fear is always the thing that needs to be overcome. At every level of the initiations of the mystery schools, it's fear initiation. Because fear is always the thing that will stop you from taking the next steps, always. And you know, the subtleties of that fear become more subtle, if you like, the more awake you become. You know, you might think that the fear goes away when you become more awakened, but actually no, it just becomes more subtle. you know. So you always have to keep very aware in your own energy field and in your own psyche and in your own mind, that you're not allowing yourself to be put into fear, you know. Because I think a huge amount of things that we're getting on the internet, that we're getting in the, if you want to say, new age media, I think a huge amount of it is fear mongering. Really, I really, I think it's fear mongering, and I think because there is such a huge awakening coming, and it is something that if we, and it's, you know, when you come to it, it's actually quite simple, and if we can get together with this is something that just can't be stopped, and it can't be stopped. It can't be stopped because it's activated by the stars. It's activated by, that's all the temples and pyramids were lined up to activate when the stars move into the right place. They just go. Nobody can stop that. Nobody can stop that. There is nobody that's going to stop that. They're trying, but they can't. And that's happening. And that's the big thing that's happening. So people need to not focus on these fear things. They need to focus on the awakening that's happening. Yeah. And start looking towards the positive. Not ignore all these fear things. Why does it matter? You know, if there's going to be a cataclysm like something like that coming, it's game over, isn't it? If something hits the earth, like a meteorite or whatever,
well,
then
it seems to have happened before on many occasions.
Let me ask you a question, okay? You know all the spots you see around the world that are supposed to be meteor hits on the ground? Let me ask you, why is every one of them a circle? Even on the moon, they're all circles. Why? Why are they circles? That's impossible. And I'll tell you why. Because a meteorite comes from the sky, yeah? It comes in at an angle. Yeah. If a meteorite hits the ground, it does not hit the ground like that, boom, and create a perfect circle. It hits the ground and it skims across the ground like a pebble across water.
Where there have been some, there have been like a scattering of some meteorites, but
you look at all, look at all the ones on the moon. Yeah. Look at all the ones on the moon. 99.9% of every meteor hit that is supposed to be a meteor hit that you see on the ground and that you see on the moon are all circles. They can't be all circles. Okay, I admit that maybe one or two of them may, in some way, might be able to fall and make a circle, but not all of them. They have to hit and skim like a stone. So I don't know what they are. Are they meteor impact sites?
That's a very good point.
Are they meteor impact sites? I don't know, you know. But then you could, I mean, there's the Sahara Desert glass. Have you heard of that? There's a whole area in the Sahara that has been turned to glass. The sand has been turned to glass. That takes huge amounts of heat to do that, you know, to turn sand to glass. So that's another interesting thing. What happened there to turn all that sand, you know?
Well, that's a good point to pause. So we'll pause.
So on the arrival of the people that we were talking about that came into Egypt, and they were called the mound builders in Egypt. So we called them the Shemshu Hor, and we said that they established the first mound, and that was the Great Pyramid, where the pyramid was built. So they were recreating their homeland, which was Ireland. It was Ireland, England, and as we said, all those land masses, Ireland, England, and Europe, were all connected. So they were recreating what they had had in their homeland. So what did they have in their homeland? What they had was, they had what we now know as the mounds, Newgrange, all those places. But what were they? So each one of those sites is placed on what's called a nodal point on an energy grid. A nodal point is where one or more lines of energy connect, and they make what's called a vortex. You know, so a vortex is very simple. If you think about, if you have a bath, a spiral, or if you have your bath, you pull the plug, the water goes down. It's a vortex. So each one of these sites is placed on one of those vortex points. Because why? Because it's based on what's called hyperdimensional physics. Okay. This is the science that they had brought from Atlantis into Egypt. So what is that? The science of a hyperdimensional physics is placing a physical thing on a vortex energy point. Why? Because a vortex energy point is like an elevator to bring you up or to bring you down, consciousness, okay? What these sites were used for, the people who were the masters of this knowledge, and this knowledge is called by a few different names. It's called alchemy. It's called the knowledge of the mystery schools. But it's also known by the book of coming forth by light, which I described to you as what they have painted and what they have carved When I mean they, the ancient Egyptians, inside all the tombs and inside all the walls of the temples. So they have described their exact science in many different ways, and they have left their science embedded holographically. Okay? Egypt is laid out in the image of the human body and also in the image of the stars above. And so are all the sites in Ireland. They're also laid out in the image. This is the science that connects both Egypt and Ireland. They're both on both sides. The sites are laid out in the image of the body and in the image of the stars. So each site represents the chakra in the body. So we'll say, for example, in Egypt, the River Nile represents the Puranic tube, and then up along the Puranic tube runs the chakra. So you start at the south, very further south, and you have Aswan, which represents the root chakra. Esna and Edfu are the sacral chakra. Luxor, where my mystery school is, the flower of light, is the solar plexus. The heart is Abydos Denra, where the flower of life is found. Saqqara is the throat, and Giza is the crown, is the third eye and the crown chakra with the great pyramids. So why am I telling you this? Because this whole science was based on the science of light. This is what Akhnaten was talking about. And his lineage, of course, is the people that came into Egypt. The reason Akhnaten was a character that was known is because he was a half-breed, if you know. He was half Irish and half Egyptian. You know, they say Hebrew, but anyway, half Irish and half Egyptian.
Sorry, did you say half Jewish?
Half Irish. His lineage was Irish.
Yeah.
Akhnaten's lineage was Irish. And that's why his daughter is buried in Kerry, Scota. So Akhnaten's lineage, and you know, Tutankhamun's DNA results have come back. And Tutankhamun's DNA results are connected to European, not Egyptian. He's European, you know. So Akhnaten was a half-breed. He was half Irish and half Egyptian. But they say Israelite, you know. They call the Irish Israelites,
yeah.
You know. So they will say that he was half Israelite, okay. So it is Akhnaten's family and lineage that brought this science in. And this is the science of the light, of the electromagnetic energy that we experience as our reality. And this is what Akhnaten was showing. He was not a sun worshipper. There was no sun worshipping in ancient Ireland. There was no sun worshipping in Egypt. There was no such thing as sun worship. It was nothing to do with sun worship. He understood the science of the light. It was not the sun. The sun was just a symbol. And the reason he picked the sun was because every single person on earth can see the sun equally. The sun shines on everybody equally. The problem in ancient Egypt at the time of Akhnaten was the Amun priesthood had become extremely corrupt. It was the state religion, and they were literally taxing the people, taking their land, taking their money, even taking their children. The Amun priesthood were well known for black magic. One of the things the Amun priesthood did, you know, we talk about crop circles now. Well, you know, we used to have sand circles, okay? And they used to have sand symbols and things that would appear around temples, symbols in the sand. This is, all information is neutral. There's no such thing as positive information or negative information. All information is neutral. We change the polarity of it. When we use the information, we either channel it out as good or bad.
It's the application of them.
It's the application. So there is black magic. There was black magic in ancient Egypt. There's black magic in modern day Egypt as well. And I've been living there many, many years. There is black magic. So one of the things that they could do was to encode the land, to close down these vortex points, okay? And this has been done all over the world, not just in Ireland. It has been done in Ireland, it's been done in Egypt, it's been done all over the world. So these vortex points have been closed down. And the vortex points are the points upon which sacred sites all over the world are placed. Why? Because and why were they called masters of the net? Because when you connect up all these sacred sites all around the world, they make a network all around the world, all these ancient sites.
But they knew that.
Absolutely, yeah.
They knew that was the whole point. They had this global... I mean, one of the things which amazed me is the highest number of standing stones are in North Korea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is a global thing that...
It's global, exactly. That's what I was saying. Yeah, it's global. So this knowledge was all over the world, you know. We all had this knowledge. I think to say that it was in one place or another is a bit like kind of, you know, ownership, you know. Everybody has this knowledge, you know. So no one country, I'm just trying to say that all the ancient world had this knowledge, you know. So I'm tracing the lineage of the people that left Ireland and went to Egypt. But those people that left Ireland went all over the place, you know. There's people that left England, they left you know, all different areas. People migrated all over the world at the time of Atlantis, you know. So the masters of the net basically were, the Shemshu Hor were then called also the masters of the net. Now this network you may be familiar with when you consider the story of Jesus and the idea that he would cast his net. So, you know, we all know that Jesus was compared to, as a fisherman, and his symbol was the fish, you know. But that's actually to do with geometry. So the fish is the viscous bacea. Why am I talking about geometry? Because this net is geometric, you know. And the symbol for this net is this. It's the flower of life. This is the symbol. But this is not just a symbol. This is the actual net. And this is their map. This is their blueprint, you know. And it's not only the blueprint for the ancient sites around the world. It's the blueprint for all created matter in the entire universe. Every single molecular structure and cellular structure is contained geometrically and numerically within this symbol. So what I was saying to you about the net. In Ireland, the River Boyne in particular mirrored the chakras in the human body. As we know, Ireland was laid out the same way as the chakras would run.
It's connected with the Nile. It's a similar...
The Nile, the Egyptians don't call the Nile the Nile. They call it the O'Neill, like O'Neill, you know. And an older name for the Nile was called the Ogia, as in Tirnan Og, as an even older name for the Nile. You know, all over Egypt, the Egyptians will call, like Armana is called Tel Armana, okay? And everywhere an Egyptian will talk about an ancient site where there's a temple. They won't call it like Luxor Temple or Karnak the way we do. They'll call it by its Arabic name. And in all the ancient sites, the word Tel is in front of most of the ancient sites. In Arabic, the word Tel means mound. That means that the temple is built on a mound. All the temples had to be built on mountains because it was those who were the mound builders who left Ireland, you know, England, Europe, where Atlantis had been located, went in and built all those mounds. So their net was the electromagnetic net that they understood based on this science, which is the flower of life. Based on this science, they knew where these vortex points are on the Earth. These vortex points are just, you know, hypothetically speaking, like elevators for consciousness, okay? Your consciousness can go out of body. Your consciousness travels on light. Your consciousness is light. Your consciousness is information. We have fiber optics that carry information through the lines for us to hook up to the internet. Yeah? So it's light that carries information. And this is what Akhnaten knew. He wasn't a sun worshipper. He understood that the information that shines on this earth to make everything grow, that activates everything, is in the light. Light is information. And that's what we are. We are a collection of information. So these people understood that what we see as physical forms, what you're seeing when you look at a person, when I look at you, when you look at me, we're seeing the physical form. You're not seeing the geometry of you or of me because you're not seeing that level. If you were to look at your molecular structure, you would see that you're perfect geometry. Everything is perfect geometry. And in the perfect, pure, crystalline state, it's perfectly pure. But when it descends into matter, it always becomes unbalanced. And it has to be unbalanced. It has to be in order to become matter. So this network that they had created over the entire Earth, for example, in Ireland, the Boyne represented the Puranic tube along which the chakras ran, and the same in ancient Egypt. The River Nile represents the Puranic tube, and up along are the temples. The initiates would go from one temple on the left side of the Nile and the right side of the Nile, and you had to study both left brain and right brain, male and female, in the ancient mystery schools. So they would go into one temple on the east side of the Nile in Egypt, and then one on the left to study the male and the female lessons. And they would zigzag up along the Nile like this. Now, if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm making the caduceus. You know the caduceus? The rod of...
It's like the serpent?
Yes. But the initiates would actually physically do this. They would spend time studying in one temple, and they would have to cross the Nile to go into another temple, and then back to another temple, and then back to... So as they moved up along the Nile, going up towards the Great Pyramid, which is their final destination, what I'm talking about is ascension. This energy grid, this crystalline energy grid that was re-established by the Shemshu Hor, by the way, the Shemshu Hor is also the Tuatha Dan. They're the same people. They're known as the Tuatha Dan in Ireland. those people, you know, names, that's the confusion of tongues. The Tower of Babel, the whole story of the Tower of Babel is how language confuses information. Because only the newest neocortex part of our brain understands language. It's only the newest addition to the human being that understands language. The most primitive part of us, our subconscious, our female aspect of our brain, of our physical brain, only understands symbols. It doesn't understand language. It only understands images, symbols, feelings, and emotions. And all the language, which is called the language of light, which is alchemy, which is what's written on all the walls in Egypt, is the book of coming forth by light. And that's the science that the Atlanteans brought into Egypt. It's the science of light, because we are light. We're light, thinking that we're physical matter. The awakening is realizing that we're light, that we are energy, that we are consciousness. Because we knew this. We all always knew this.
But this awakening's happening again now.
It's happening now. It's happening now. And the Battle of the Boyne, just to get back to what we were saying, those energy codes that were put on the land, that was done all over the earth. And that was done by people who knew what they were doing. And when you put energy codes, blocks, it's the block that was put on the land and all around these sites, even in ancient Ireland, because we exist in a hologram, you know, everything is on smaller and larger scales of each other. That's when you start to study the flower of life and you understand the geometry, it's all fractal. So if you cannot affect one thing within a network or within a hologram without affecting everything. So when, for example, the sites, this ritual that was done at the Battle of the Boyne to shut down all these sites, the equivalent thing happened in every person in Ireland. All their chakra were shut down. Now, people talk about implants, and they talk about, you know, things that are implanted into their, and that's true.
Well,
all
there's
these
basically two types: the physical implants by technology.
What we have naturally.
Etheric, energetic one.
Absolutely. In our natural crystalline energy grid, which, if you remember, in the beginning I told you in the motorbike accident, I was shown that there was two energy grids. There's one that's completely out of balance.
Who showed you?
This, when I was taken out of body, when I was taken to the temples in Egypt, the guy that was asking me the questions, when I was brought to the other place, I was shown all these things. And when I came back into my body after the accident, I lived it for 5 years. I thought I was going insane because everything was wrong. I could see how people were going around and they didn't know who they were. I could see it, you know. I get my information through dreaming, you know. And by the way, the ancient Egyptians were shamanic. They were a shamanic culture. This information is protected in what's called dream time, and has been for thousands of years. You know the Aboriginal dream time? Dream time, you know the Aboriginal dream time? Yes. So when people are of high, when people can access dream time, then they can access this information as well. But it's protected from people who can't access dream time. So that's why you always had people who were shamans, who could go into dream time and come back and give the information to the people, because not everybody could do this. But this is what we can do. We can all do it. It's just that we have forgotten that we can do this.
Well, somebody's deliberately engineered us not to do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nephilim,
yeah.
or yes. That law. What about that?
Well,
that
you know,
law? Nephilim, Anunnaki.
You know, well, I mean, in ancient Ireland, you know, the two-headed An, where it says they were, you know, of the goddess Anna or Anu, you know, and the whole thing about Anu, it connects with a place in Egypt called Heliopolis. Heliopolis is a Greek name, but it's actually called On, and it's the city of the sun. You know, it's very in depth, but you know, Ptah was the creator. Each place in Egypt had different mythologies, you know. But for example, you're saying Anu. The whole idea of Anu comes from ancient Egypt, Sumeria, as we know, but also ancient Egypt, and the people who left the area of Heliopolis carrying the knowledge of Ptah. Now, a priest of Ptah in ancient Egypt was called a Ptah Rek. That's where the word Patrick comes from, you know. Patrick coming into Ireland. That's a whole different story, but I mean, so about the site's been closed down. That's what happened in the ritual of the Battle of the Boyne. The sites were closed down, yes, all the ancient sites in Ireland, but the mirror effect happened in the people. All their chakra were closed down as well, and this happened all over the world. So when we naturally descend...
That's a great darkening.
Yes, the dark ages.
That's a great...
Yeah. And those...
I mean, maybe we need to talk about this in a great deal of detail. We're really coming up to the close of this first thing. There's clearly a huge amount that you need to talk about.
Yes.
Just in this last couple of minutes, can people see any of your other work, or do you have any websites or anything like that?
My website is floweroflight.com and floweroflight.co.uk. Either one of those addresses will get to me. floweroflight.com or floweroflight.co.uk.
You Egyptian?
What I do is I run journeys in Egypt on the solstices and the equinoxes. At the moment, I've been in Ireland for 2 years because I'm establishing my mystery school in Ireland, which will connect with the one in Egypt. I have the only Irish Druid Egyptian mystery school in Egypt. It's the only one.
Well, that seems like an excuse to
It's a Druid temple right in front of Toth Hill, right in front of the Valley of the Kings, and it was built to reunify the ancient knowledge of Ireland and Egypt.
Now,
and
are we talking the old Druids or the new ones?
This is ancient stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, I'm talking about this really ancient information, this pure crystalline information, which has been, we can say the grid as we were talking about. This exists in a pure crystalline state. I mean our consciousness, our reality, what we can experience. We can experience heaven on earth. That is our divine birthright. But it wasn't just that they closed down sites. There was a completely false energy grid created in which we experience a completely skewed reality, which is limited, it's fearful, there's all those things. And we were talking about the implants. These implants are they're in your energy field, okay? You come in with them. You come in before you even become physical. They're in your energy field. But on the other hand, so are all the keys. These keys are in your energy field, waiting to be activated. And these are the keys to the pure crystalline energy grid. They're all in your energy field. These are the keys that open. Remember I told you there's 3 temples. There's the holo records, there's the actual temple, and there's the energy temple above. All of the energy temples exist for those in high consciousness, okay? You can enter those temples. They're called Ascension temples. But the keys to those temples are contained in your energy field. They're activation codes.
Now those, it's not like a key you wear around your neck.
They're codes. They're codes that are contained in your energy field. And when they're activated, you can enter the Hall of Records and the Ascension temples of the pyramids and of all the temples in Egypt and all over the world. And what they contain is what we call the Akashic records. So these sites, the mounds, the sites all over the world, they connect to an entire holographic body of information. We say the Akashic records. Nothing exists the way we think it does. We think things are solid. It's not. This is the illusion. Everything is energy. So we're operating on the wrong laws in terms of where we should be, because we exist in this state where we believe that we're physical, that we're finite, that we're born, that we die, and that's all there is. But that's not all there is. And that's what Akhnaten and his revolution was trying to establish. That's the knowledge he brought out of Ireland. And he had maintained the pure knowledge all the way from the generations that went into Egypt, all the way to his time. And he saw the total corruption in ancient Egypt in his time among the Eamon priesthoods. Not just corruption, black magic. And that's what's been used today, black magic. Until you know what this black magic is, you've no protection against it. So the information that I teach, the flower of life, the geometry, this is all the actual activations of these pure crystalline codes that are in your energy field. And that's what we need to do. We work on the positive. We work on activating these codes. I bring people on ascension journeys in Egypt. I physically bring them into all the temples that relate to every chakra. And as we go into the temple, we activate the chakra, we clear it of all negative implants that may be there, that are there. We clear them and we activate the actual code that's meant to be activated, which is your higher consciousness code or your higher self code. And we activate them in each temple as we physically go. The journeys last 2 weeks, some 1 week, it depends. But I go into a temple, each temple we go in, activate, 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 all the way up until the Great Pyramid represents the third eye and the crown chakra. And so we end the journey always on either the solstice or the equinox inside the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber. And these are the final activations. And I teach this information about the flower of life, about alchemy. I teach about how it all connects into ancient Ireland and how this information goes back even further than ancient Atlantis, because even time, the construction of what we call time doesn't exist either. It's a mental construct.
Well, I think we're going to have to call it a day on basis 64.
If I could just say as well that I do quantum healing hypnotherapy as well. I was also trained by Dolores Cannon. I do that specifically in relation to opening the Akashic records for people. I combine my knowledge of hypnosis with my knowledge of the mystery schools. And so on my journeys, I use the quantum healing as well, but I also do private consultations with the quantum healing. And I do that from Trim or Navan. So if anybody wants to
do you do Skype?
Me. I don't do quantum healing over Skype, but I'm glad you asked me that actually, but I do have, there's a system of healing that is as old as the information I'm telling you, and it's called bioquantum geometric healing. It's called bio because it works on the biological, quantum because it works in the energy field. And it's literally about activating these codes, these pure crystalline codes that we have.
We'll have to wind it up.
And taking out the implants.
Well, thank you very much, Antoinette.
And thank you.
It's been a delight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It has been a bit of a rush. I have there's so much to say, that it would take a long time to get it all in.
Well, I'm fascinated by the connection between Ireland,
it's incredible.
These islands, the ancient Atlantis and the Grecian and the Egyptian connection.
And I think so many people are becoming more and more, in Ireland, so many people are waking up to that and understanding why will we stop speaking our language.
Well, we're running out of media, so we'll just have to say, may your God, in the words of a wise ancient sage of Ireland, may your God go with you.
Thank you very much, and you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.